The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year the best pharmaceutical product, the best biotechnology product, the best medical technology, and the best digital health product.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
I thank His Excellency, the President, for bringing Prix Galien to Africa, and I look forward to the day when we will celebrate an African winner of the Prix Galien.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation. The Galien Week of Innovation has been made possible thanks to our precious friends and partners who share the Galien Foundation's values. First off, the two exclusive platinum partners are We would now like to acknowledge our two gold partners. Furthermore, we proudly introduce our corporate leaders partners. The associate partners are the grantors are To conclude, we are extremely fortunate to work with outstanding media partners who have contributed to the Galien Foundation's renown.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, whatever it may be for you. My name is Stephen Lester. I'm a cardiologist. I work here at Mayo Clinic and have the privilege of being the founder and chief medical officer of the Mayo Clinic and Arizona State University MedTech Accelerator Program. And I really want to welcome you all to the Galien Foundation Week of Innovation webinars. The objective this week really is to provide additional content and background for our largest annual event, the Prix Galien USA Awards, to be held this Thursday in New York, and in conjunction really with our annual Galien Forum of speakers representing top scientific experts and leaders in global health. And we developed this new webinar series to give our nominees for Best Pharmaceutical, Best Biotech, Best MedTech, Best Digital Solution Products greater visibility in discovering their journey of medical discovery. And it's especially timely as the Galien Foundation marks its 50th Golden Jubilee, culminating this December with the first awards event in Africa to recognize the best of the best biomedical innovations in the last 50 years. This year's Galien USA Awards has a record 84 nominees for our 4 categories, 65 companies, 15 diverse therapeutic areas ranging from cancer to cardiology, neurosciences, to infectious diseases and very rare genetic diseases. And we're looking closely at the science behind these products throughout the week. And because of the number of nominees and the range of conditions represented by this really excellent science, the Galien USA Awards Committee has decided to host a series really now of 14 webinars prior to Thursday's awards ceremony, where the winners of each of our 4 best categories will be announced. Now, in the best MedTech category, which is really our focus today, we'll be holding 3 webinars due to the large number, 18 or so products represented in this really exciting and important field. Now, the webinar in this hour, we've allotted to 4 nominees in medical devices and implants for cardiovascular diseases. And what we will really cover today relates to that central question: how much are new technologies and engineering efficiencies contributing to the clinical progress against the world's biggest killer disease, that of course being cardiovascular disease? Now, the webinar includes some time for each of you to ask questions, and the questions can be forwarded to ourselves using the link provided on your screen. Now, before we get started, we'd like to ask a quick poll question, and the results of which will come at the end of this webinar. And the questions will come up in just a moment here, so we can look at these and ask ourselves, what is the most promising new medical advance likely within the next 5 to 10 years? You can only make one choice, but the one option is effective and accessible vaccines for major global killers like HIV, malaria, TB. Solving the blood-brain barrier leads to advances against a variety of neurologic disorders, including effective treatments for Alzheimer's disease, or the introduction of comprehensive diagnostics and therapeutic vaccines as a preventive tool against a wide variety of cancers. Further refinement in safe, clinically effective CAR-T and other cell gene editing therapies across tissue types and disease conditions. And finally, the widespread use of patient-friendly digital and biosensor platform technologies that control or prevent the progression of major chronic diseases. Please select what you think. All right. With that, let's just move on to our discussion. And I would just sort of begin by saying it is interesting to recognize that over the last at least century, there's been this linear climb in record life expectancy. And it's been written that this linear climb shouldn't be seen as a disconnected sequence of unrepeatable revolutions, but rather a stream of continuing progress. And therefore, in healthcare, we're really faced with an epidemic. And this is an epidemic of aging and age-associated disease, where we're beginning to see temporal shifts in both the functional state and the etiology of disease. And this then adds complexity to the shared decision-making we as providers have with our patients when addressing therapeutic options. And MedTech discoveries and solutions are beginning to bring simplicity to these complex medical problems. The world of cardiovascular medicine has been privileged to provide our patients many innovative MedTech solutions, which we're going to hear about some today. And I'm really inspired and honored to introduce the nominees in cardiovascular medical devices and implants, led by the scientific and clinical representatives that are joining me here for the webcast today. With us, let me please introduce Stephanie Clockie, Vice President, RD Becton Dickinson, and she'll introduce to us their Venovo Venous Stent system. We have Nadim Yared, President and CEO of CVRx, and he's going to share with us insights into their Barostim, really the world's first neuromodulating device for the treatment of heart failure. Russ Joseph is with us. Thanks, Russ, as Senior Director, Product Development of Transcatheter Heart Valves for Edwards Life Sciences, and will highlight the innovative Sapien 3 Ultra Transcatheter Heart Valve System. And JP Urbanski, Director of Strategic Marketing, Baylis Medical, and he's going to share with us a unique transeptal puncture platform. I should mention that there is an accessible link, and each of the companies have placed a 100 or so word statement to give you further insights into the companies. So with that, maybe we'll begin our discussion, Stephanie, and I can, if you don't mind me asking you a question. You know, the management of the deep venous system is really quite complex. It has unique challenges, right? And how we're going to manage and treat post-thrombotic syndrome versus non-thrombotic iliac vein lesions. And there are marked differences in things such as, stents radial force and conformability and flexibility when addressing really the performance, right, in the venous system. And I really would be interested if you could share with us some of the unique features of your stent system and why your company really chose to focus in this particular area. What are the indications for your product, and how significant do you think was the unmet clinical need?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Lester. Once again, my name is Stephanie Klippke. It's an honor to be here today. And like you said, venous thromboembolism is a very unique disease, and our product, the Venovo venous stent system, is specifically indicated to treat symptomatic iliofemoral venous outflow obstructions. We chose this to address that question about why did we choose this disease state to address. Venous thromboembolism includes DVT, so deep vein thrombosis, which is when you form blood clots in the deep vein, most typically in the leg. And then, of course, pulmonary embolism, which is when these blood clots actually release from the veins and move into the lungs. And this patient population in the US includes over 900,000 cases a year, with over 100,000 people dying annually. It's a huge healthcare burden, $2 to $10 billion annually as well. So the situation here, though, is that this disease is often underdiagnosed. It tends often as well to be seen in young female patients, those who may present with May-Thurner syndrome. And the traditional conventional treatment mechanism is conventional medical management and maybe compression. The challenge, though, there is that a lot of these patients, then up to 80%, never really have their symptoms resolved. So over the last few decades, the treatment approach has shifted to endovascular treatment, as you referred to, and using stents off-label. So stents that were really designed for the arterial system being used in a vein. However, I think everyone probably on this call realizes that veins and arteries are very, very different. And so the challenges that occurs when using an arterial stent is, you can see they don't nearly have enough radial strength to support the crush resistance that occurs, or the crush that can occur in a vein. And also they can migrate because the vein is so collapsible, right? The stent actually can migrate and move, and many, or in certain, I don't want to say many, but sometimes can lead to migration to the heart, which is obviously a severe clinical sequela. So we chose to address this because we felt this is an unmet need. It is a problem that we know we can solve. And so that's what we did. We took it upon ourselves to address this challenge. We do have a Nitinol self-expanding stent. It is specifically designed with very strong radial strength. It is crush resistant, and it also has flared ends, which is one of the really unique design attributes that prevent this migration. We've had great clinical success. We just released our 3-year vernacular clinical trial results, where we've actually seen primary patency rates at 93.6% for non-thrombotic iliac vein lesions specifically, which are incredible results, and 70% primary patency for those post-thrombotic syndrome patients. We've had 0 stent migrations, 0 stent fractures, which are common complications with stents. It's a known complication on the market. So to have 0 incidences of that occurring in our clinical trial is something we're very proud of. And we feel that we've really made an improvement with this product for the treatment of venous outflow obstructions.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Didn't want to interrupt you if you were going to have more to say. No, I really appreciate that. It really sort of highlights that the vascular system is the unique pathoanatomic issues, and that a stent used for the arterial systems may not necessarily be ideal in the venous system. So we congratulate you for that, and thank you for taking time to share with us some of your thoughts. Maybe Nadim, I could go to you, and really, we think about the prevalence of heart failure. It is rapidly increasing. It no doubt inflicts considerable morbidity and mortality. It consumes a considerable amount of healthcare resources. And the natural history of heart failure has really been altered by neurohormonal modulating therapies, but these therapies have largely been pharmacotherapy based. And so I'm really inspired that your team introduces to us this device, which may too modulate the neurohormonal system. And I'd be interested if you could share with us a little bit about the device whether there's a measurable impact you can really cite on clinical outcomes for patients using this product, and what's been the clinical response for this product so far, Nadim?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Lester. Great questions. By the way, I would like also to acknowledge in here and thank the Galien Foundation for inviting us here to present today and for nominating us for the Prix Galien. Let's start first, talk a little bit about heart failure. This is sometimes a misunderstood disease. The hearts are becoming larger in time. Patients have swelling in the legs, fatigue, low energy, hospitalizations, and death. And as the disease progresses, the lucky patients will end up receiving a left ventricular assist device or a heart transplant. And those are very invasive surgeries, open up the chest. And the heart transplant is a miracle, but you need to find a heart donor. And when the patient is above the age of 70, it's unlikely that they will make it up in the priority list. And it is, on top of this human factor, this is a very costly disease. If you lump all of cancers together, then cancer is the most expensive disease. But if you don't, then heart failure is the most expensive disease right now in the United States. And the mechanism of action of the disease is rather poorly understood, but some elements of it are well understood. One source cause, a root cause of the heart failure is that imbalance of the sympathetic system. Usually heart failure subjects, heart failure patients have their systems in overdrive all of the time. So their fight or flight mechanisms is working super hard all of the time, and their rest and digest mechanism is not working as hard. So this is akin to, driving your car at a traffic light. The light is red, you step on the gas and you keep your foot on the gas all of the time. Well, it's fun the first time, but if you do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for many years, you'll kill your engine. That's exactly what happens in heart failure. So how do we stop this? We use the brain. The brain is the place where that control of this autonomic nervous system happens. If we could influence the brain to tell the brain, hey, you know what, reduce that fight or flight mechanism and increase the rest and digest. And if the brain listens to us, then that fixes the root cause of heart failure, but also of other diseases. How do we do this? Well, instead of going directly to the brain and trying to cross this blood-brain barrier issue, right, or be very invasive going inside the deep skull, we figured out where are the input mechanism of the brain. And one of this very potent input mechanism happened to be here in the carotid artery. We all humans have stretch fibers in the wall of the carotid, and with every beat of the heart, they stretch like nutcrackers. They send neurochemicals to the brain. The brain interprets this to understand how much of the blood is flowing to the brain, and therefore how much oxygenation is happening at the brain cell level. With electricity, we can charge those baroreceptors, those stretch fibers, and make them fire faster. This is very similar to lighting a match under your thermostat in your office. The heat from the match will fool the thermostat, then the AC will start sending more cool air. That's much more effective than opening up the louvers or removing the register or anything else, right? Because you're tricking the brain, you're tricking the control system of the AC. We're doing the same thing. So no matter where that source of the disease is starting, by triggering the baroreflex through that port in the carotid, we elicit that response from the brain. How do we do this? We use electricity, so a neurostimulator device, so similar to a pacemaker, except instead of the wire going inside the heart, the wire touches the outside of the carotid artery. The beauty of this, number one, the real estate inside the heart is very busy. There are so many devices. Often those patients have other diseases. It's very difficult to get more stuff inside the heart. We're outside. Second, we're outside of the arterial system or the venous system, just under the skin, but we don't go inside the bloodstream. And so far, the results have been short of amazing in this. We had ran a 5-year clinical trial from 2016 to 2021. The results were published in middle of 2020, the symptomatic results. The device demonstrated to improve quality of life. 14 points, usually a 5 points improvement in this scale is deemed to be clinically meaningful. 60-meter longer distance within 6 minutes, and that makes a difference between the patients being able to walk to their mailbox or not. NYHA classification, improvement from class 3, which is mild severe, to class 2 or even class 1, which is very, very mild. Doctors have been amazed by the results. They embrace this technology, but patients, oh my, I can't tell you. Sometimes, particularly during the pandemic, I would be afraid of talking to patients because they want to hug. And those are patients with a sometimes compromised immune system. So I don't want to be hugged right now. Wait a year from now and hug me all you want. But patients love this device. They tell me they're giving their life back. So thank you for asking the question.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it really is interesting. Obviously the brain controls everything. And we certainly know that when people have brain injuries, we begin to see functional changes in the heart. So to be able to take it the other way around when there are sort of functional abnormalities in cardiac function and to stimulate components of the brain to sort of address what we've been doing with pharmacotherapies, you take many, many pills per day when you have the clinical syndrome of heart failure, certainly with reduced ejection fraction. So to be able to circumvent this with some form of electrical signal is really quite interesting. And you're right, there is very little real estate left in the heart with all the devices that are going in. And with that said, Russ, maybe I could ask you a question. Aortic stenosis is really a very common primary valve lesion. It is a mechanical problem, and it requires a mechanical solution. And the advent and widespread clinical adoption of transcatheter heart valve replacement has really changed the landscape and the indications for valve replacement. And so really interested, to understand really the transition that you had from that sort of early proof of concept to the trials and lessons and experiences that might add to better understanding and market authorization, and how you took this incredible, valve system and allowed it to become such a widespread clinical tool.
Thanks, Dr. Lester, for the opportunity to participate in this presentation. You're right. There was a time when replacing a heart valve without open heart surgery was unthinkable. And this changed in November of 2011 when the FDA approved the first transcatheter heart valve in the United States. Before then, the only way to replace a heart valve was to stop the heart, open the chest, and remove the valve surgically. Stenosis patients, especially elderly stenosis patients, were too ill to undergo open heart surgery in some cases and faced dire odds, 50% mortality at 2 years. Today, TAVR is a breakthrough technology that has changed the treatment of structural heart disease. Since approval, over 500,000 patients in the US have been treated with TAVR technologies for aortic stenosis. And the approval have since filtered down to low-risk patients where survival is 99% at 1 year. Outstanding achievements. The pathway to innovating this breakthrough therapy took Edwards more than a decade. It involved bold risks, significant investment, resources, extensive clinical study, as well as the appetite to take on the challenges and uncertainties that come with creating a new standard of care. Being the first with such a transition therapy as TAVR, there were no shortages of challenges. But even before you face those challenges, you need the idea, you need the concept, you need the innovation, and you need the ability to put the right people in place to take advantage of these ideas. It took innovators like Dr. Henning Anderson to envision the concept. It took pioneers like Dr. Alain Crebier to understand and trust the technology and be willing to put the technology in the first patient. And it took leaders like Mike Musalem to build a company willing to take the risks that come with such a large investment. One of the first challenges that we faced was perception and myth. Clinicians and regulators were very skeptical that the tissue in a transcatheter heart valve would work after crimping and re-expanding in a patient. Even the frame technology was questioned. I was asked multiple times how many welds were in the frame. And the answer was simple, there are no welds, but it was new technology that was poorly understood. Even with the in vitro and large animal data meeting all of the standards for international standards and FDA, there was still skepticism from physicians and regulators alike on the durability of these valves in patients. Initial sizes were limited and we could not treat all patients. Early designs did not allow crimping to very small profiles. A 29 millimeter valve in those days required a sheath larger than 24 French. That's an 8 millimeter puncture you had to put in the patient. With newer valve and system designs, most transcatheter valves can be delivered with a 14 French, an outstanding accomplishment. And this has made transcatheter therapy virtually available to every patient with aortic stenosis. Early approvals allowing use of transcatheter valves were limited to inoperable patients, only patients who had no other options. That's the way it should be with such a revolutionary therapy, but it came with its complications. The average age of the first patients in the trial to receive a sapien valve was 83 years old. So even though these patients got to spend some very precious years with their families after having a TAVR replacement, this patient population was not able to give us long-term durability patients. They were very advanced in age, had a lot of comorbidities. So even with a successful transcatheter valve to treat their aortic stenosis, they didn't live, very long. So it was an amazing clinical trial to get the process going, but we still needed more data. And at the time, there were no existing standards for testing THVs. So we researched the surgical valve standards, the stent standards, and looked at other implications of the therapy to come up with the appropriate test plan. We still got questions from regulators on very simple things like, why aren't you doing a sewing cuff separation study? And the answer was, this is a different therapy. There are no sewing cuffs. There are no welds in the frames. Bench testing of THVs turned to be much more complicated than surgical valves. With the current standards, you can test the whole family of surgical valves with very few valves. But with transcatheter valves, the physician has a lot of flexibility in how they implant the valve. So the testing was much more involved. We tested all sizes. We tested multiple configurations like oval, slightly oval valves, undersized valves, oversized deployments, just to make sure we covered everything that a physician might do. This had drastically increased the amount of equipment we needed, the time to do the testing, and in some cases, tests took over 6 months to complete. But however challenging our early experiences were, we quickly learned that going first has its advantages. We formed strong relationships with regulatory bodies and physicians who were early adopters and wanted to understand the technology and determine how it could best benefit their patients. So to summarize, the challenges are many when trying to take a potential revolutionary therapy from bench to patient to commercialization. And it took innovators and leaders like Drs. Cribier and Anderson and Mike Masalem to have the commitment and tenacity to see it through. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. I mean, that is something that is quite unique, to be able to watch an aortic valve be replaced in a matter of a few seconds, really. But once there's access, it's a very quick procedure. And really the recovery is just the arterial access. And as you said, the French sizes get smaller, and is changing the paradigm for how we manage this issue of aortic stenosis, right? As we said at the beginning, older patients, and now we're seeing less and less risk patients, maybe to bicuspid aortic valves or valve-in-valve therapy, which may change, which it has sort of guideline recommendations really in a way for the age of patients for which types of valves we place. So it is a remarkable thing to watch 2 or 3 of these valves be replaced in a morning, and then the patients go home the next day. It's I'm not an interventional, I'm an imaging-based cardiologist, but I'm in those procedures. Each time a valve, there's an imager there. So it's a remarkable thing. So
yeah, patients are on the table for less than an hour and go home the next day. It's an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, soon maybe an outpatient therapy, to be honest.
Yes.
So congratulations to that. And last but certainly not least, JP, really was sort of thinking, with the sort of increased engagement of structural interventions, whether they be left atrial appendage occlusion devices or atrial fibrillation procedures, or now TMVR therapy, transcatheter mitral valve therapies, in order to access the very first part and an important part of the procedure is, particularly us as imagers, we have to guide that transeptal puncture so that it's at the right place, particularly for mitral interventions. And so you've created in your team, a very unique sort of transeptal platform, and be interested to understand a little bit about that. And, why did you really focus on this particular indication, and why did you think we needed a change in the sort of older ways of doing transeptal punctures and access to the left atrium?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lester. And a huge thank you to the foundation, and congratulations to my fellow panelists today. It's been really interesting hearing your own stories. So hopefully I'll share a little bit about the discovery process that went into enabling better cardiovascular therapies. So Baylis Medical, we are not a therapy company. So we are an enabler of cardiovascular therapies, and specifically delivering solutions for transeptal access to the left heart, which is really a gateway for many of these emerging minimally invasive therapies in cardiac ablation, electrophysiology, and structural heart. And so there are about 300,000 cases annually in the US. And these are some of the fastest areas growing of cardiovascular medicine. And so most engineers are very surprised to learn that the solutions that were used for transeptal access, when they were first described in the 1960s, they haven't really evolved since then. Initially, physicians would use a long, sharp stainless steel needle that is introduced from the femoral vein into the right atrium. And the premise is that when the needle is supported by dilators and sheaths, an operator would just push on that long, sharp needle, and it should puncture from the right atrium to the left atrium through the interatrial septal tissue. So safety and efficacy, it's really unpredictable when you use a sharp needle for that, owing to variability in patient-to-patient anatomy. And as you can appreciate, the size, the shape, and the toughness of that septal tissue as an imager, it might not be known ahead of time. And that device is also highly unforgiving and anxiety provoking. So a physician needs to carefully manipulate and push a sharp tip inside of a beating heart, which is a highly dynamic environment. So Baylis developed an alternative to the sharp needle, and it was released in 2010. And this was called the Energy RF Transeptal Needle. So Baylis fundamentally solved the challenges of tissue variability by providing a repeatable and forgiving access solution. And that platform was readily adopted by a range of skill sets, enabling a new standard of care for access. We like to think that we really democratized transeptal access. Historically, when you're using a sharp needle, it required a really specialized skill set and a lot of training. However, that really limits the number of patients who can benefit from transeptal procedures. So if you can democratize access and make that standardized, more patients can benefit in a single day from cardiac ablation or from mitral valve repair. Looking at the future of transeptal and in many ways reimagining how therapy can be delivered even more efficiently, we actually had to invent something better than the energy transeptal needle. So this is what set the stage for our recently launched VersaCross platform, based on the premise of moving on from needles entirely, where we're using RF guide wires. So while the energy transeptal needle, if we just describe this system initially, it remained interchangeable with BRK needles, which were the long, sharp stainless steel needles that many cardiologists had trained on. But the success of that platform, it's really because it mimicked the form factor and familiarity of those sharp needles. It was purely additive in the way it was designed and engineered. We didn't want to make physicians learn new things on performing transeptal, which was already anxiety provoking. We just wanted to remove the dangerous elements of that. So the sharpness of those needles, it's comparable to about the tip of a ballpoint pen. And when you leverage RF puncture energy, you just position the tip of that needle up against the interatrial septum. You deliver RF energy and you can cross with low anxiety to the left heart. So it didn't matter if that cardiac tissue was thick and scarred or stretchy and elastic. You just let the RF do the work. And so there's no jumping of sharp tips into the heart. So as those therapies have evolved, and similar to what Russ has described, so have their unique challenges and needs for heart access. So there's many different form factors, sizes of sheath. You need different accuracy of where you puncture on the interatrial septum, because that really dictates where you're going to steer catheters to target different anatomies of interest, such as the mitral valve. And so you need transeptal accuracy. You need to be able to safely introduce large sheaths into the left heart and do so in a predictable manner. If you're going to be doing procedures that are often approaching an hour, you can't be spending 30 minutes on the transeptal puncture. So the Baylis tools have enabled that in a matter of minutes. And just to, so everyone can appreciate the size of some of these systems, like the 28 French that Russ had mentioned, that's about the size of your pinky finger. So you need to navigate this sometimes through tortuous anatomy and bring this safely to the left heart just before you even begin the therapy. And now if I just was to describe our next generation transeptal solution in VersaCross, and this is what was nominated for the Prix Galien this week. Clinically speaking, as good as the energy needle has been, it was inherently limited by its own form factor. A better puncture alone is not enough to drive therapies, given there remains a large number of devices and a large number of non-value-added exchanges just to get in the heart. And you would often have to use up to 5 unique devices before you start your therapy. So our challenges as an organization was we already had the best transeptal needle arguably in the world. But that was our competition, where it worked 99.999% of the time in under 3 minutes. How do we compete with that while also delivering a better user experience that respects the training and muscle memory of our cardiologists? So the premise of the VersaCross system was based on 2 key concepts. The first is an RF guide wire that combined all of the RF puncture mechanics of the energy needle, but it enabled a guide wire form factor to enable immediate delivery of therapeutic sheaths to the left heart. The second pillar of VersaCross was a family of specialty dilators to optimize the wire performance. And what's unique about these dilators and families of sheaths is that they actually feel like a transeptal needle. So we had to design something that feels like a needle without being a transeptal needle form factor. And so what was the most rewarding part of this experience? We talked to many of these cardiologists who've adopted VersaCross Stents. They say that's the most relaxed transeptal puncture I've done in 10 years. The time to enable access has been halved. We can provide access using only 2 devices now instead of 5. And as the panel would appreciate, you want to minimize any unnecessary exchanges in and out of the bloodstream. So I'll leave it at that, Dr. Lester, but I'm open to any questions the team may have.
Oh, appreciate that. And I think that really does highlight the issue. You know what, when we're doing these interventions on the left side, it all begins with the transeptal puncture, and particularly for mitral interventions and left atrial appendage interventions, getting that right height and so forth can really impact how long that procedure actually takes. Because if you don't get the right transeptal puncture, you could be there for a lot longer trying to get certain components of say the mitral valve, wherever that lesion might be, if looking at sort of transcatheter edge-to-edge repairs with some of those devices. So we really appreciate the work that you've done. And really, it's really, as I said at the beginning, quite inspiring to sort of hear the stories of each of you and the work that each of you are doing, because, you know, really innovation involves, as I say, originality and creativity. And it entails moving forward, as you said, Russ, from the unknown and the uncertain, and that sort of optimistic belief that there are always going to be solutions as long as one continues to search for opportunities to achieve them. And I think each one of you have really shared those experiences. I sort of love a quote, you know, Edison said, "I didn't fail 1,000 times. I just found 1,000 ways that didn't work," right? I mean, he knew what he wanted to do, flip a switch and turn on a light, but it just took a little while to get there, but he never lost sight of what that final outcome was going to be. And I think each of you have really inspired us to understand the importance of what that means for innovators. And so to be congratulated for each of the things that you've done. And thanks for sharing with us your products. I want to just to the audience make mention that there is opportunity if you would like to ask questions, just to please put them in the Q&A, and we'll have an opportunity in a moment to ask any of those questions. But you know what I'd like to ask, and And maybe, and Nadim, I can ask you first, but to each of you similarly, where do you see sort of the next wave of innovation sort of trending in your individual product area? And the other thing I wanted to ask is, what new areas of, as an individual who runs a MedTech accelerator, I'd really be interested to each of you, what areas of MedTech science really excite you the most? And where do you think, like the Galien Awards, what do you think we'll be reviewing now 5 years down the line? So maybe Nadim, you could share with us some of your thoughts, and unfortunately get to go first. You don't have as much time to think about it, but I'll ask each of you a similar a question.
Sure, doctor. Listen, in our field, basically the neurostimulation for, treating autonomic diseases, there are so many other similar diseases that we're talking about. There is the second form of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, where the heart stays the same size, but the walls become thicker and they cannot fill with blood. Resistant hypertension, big problem, uncontrolled. Even, some of it allegedly is due to the lack of compliance with drugs, but many of the patients have been giving it their best and they still cannot control blood pressure. Chronic kidney disease, and as those patients transition from stage 1 chronic kidney disease to stage 5 end stage renal disease, dialysis and so forth. Arrhythmia. So all of those diseases share the same underlying mechanism, which is an elevated sympathetic tone at rest and a depressed parasympathetic tone. So that's where our platform could address those. Now, there are other approaches to do this, and they do not have necessarily to go through the carotid artery. Right now, Medtronic is developing a technology using denervation mechanism, so renal denervation, trying to address the resistant hypertension. It showed decent results when the patient is not on medications. Now we're waiting for the results when the patients are on medications to see if that works. That could be an interesting substitute for diuretic. It basically ensures compliance. It's not nephrotoxic and so forth. But that's on the disease management side. You have to look as well horizontally from the detection, diagnosis, screening of the diagnosis of the disease to everything that happened preoperative, perioperative, and postoperative, then to the long-term management of the patients. And this is where we include all of the wearable devices, sensing technologies, big data, and so forth. So anytime anybody has words that includes heart failure, autonomic nervous system, sympathetic, you see my eyes opening wide open and looking about what's existing out there.
Yeah, I know you caught my interest when you were saying, I'm a director of an HCM clinic. And so these thick-walled cardiomyopathies and how you phenotypically, they all look the same, and differentiating those and finding appropriate treatments for sort of the non-genetic components of these diseases is important. So I'll be inspired to see what you bring next to help us out in our clinic from that perspective, because many of them are HFpEF patients, right? And so can we address in a similar way the management of these types of patients? JP, a similar question, where do you see the sort of the next thing? I mean, you just came out with this new VersaCross system, but where do you see things going from here? And really more globally in MedTech, you've seen all the different contenders. What sort of inspires you or excites you the most?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. And so as an access company, right, how do we make therapies more easily adopted by the next generation of cardiologists and cardiovascular experts? So, in many ways, we talked about transeptal puncture, and 20 years ago, that really wasn't considered a discipline of its own. Now you have entire transeptal training programs. How can these EP programs treat more patients per day? Same-day discharge, especially during the pandemic period, many labs had to switch to same-day discharge for patient safety and staff safety, whereas that can now be a sustainable way of thinking through the future of EP and structural heart procedures. So we are strong believers in that. Inside of electrophysiology, then you can appreciate this, how much fluoroscopy our patients and our physicians are exposed to. So we think the next generation of cardiovascular tools is going to require the integration of access with imaging as well as therapy delivery. And so in electrophysiology, for example, we have these absolutely incredible 3D mapping systems, essentially creating GPS systems of your heart. How can we as innovators tie that directly into access, tie that into registration with ultrasound? How can we enable individual patient therapy delivery without exposing our physicians to harmful x-rays every day? And also keeping in mind, the patient might only see one set of x-rays, but the patient is one of 300 that year for the attending. Like it's absolutely harmful, and it's really damaging to the staff as well as morale of wearing lead all day. And so we think that's going to be the next generation of tying into these ablation modalities, which are also evolving rapidly. RF focal ablation, for example, for paroxysmal and persistent AF ablations, the ablations used to take like 4 to 6 hours. And now these are being done in 2 hours or less with all these exciting new modalities. The next generation tools, such as pulse field ablation, which are being pursued by Medtronic as well as Boston, they have the potential to unlock ablation therapies in under 30 minutes, skin to skin. Like this is going to unlock a hugely addressable market so many patients can have higher quality of life. So, you know, I'll hand it back to you, Lester, but I think that the integration of access with imaging and therapy delivery is the future for us.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. You know, I mean, one of the reasons I became an imaging-based cardiologist, I couldn't stand in the lead all day long. You know, 30 years ago, I was thinking, oh, I mean, it was just taxing. So, and then with back surgery, I realized that was the end of that. So, and then as an imager, what's really inspiring is the ability to have this kind of fusion imaging to sort of support using harmless energy source imaging like ultrasound, for example, and fusing that with some of the fluoroscopy based systems, or, you know, fusion with CT and other things that can help sort of expedite the sort of anatomical mapping to get some of these longer procedures done in a more timely or expeditiously timing fashion. So I'm with you on that. That will be exciting to see, because that road is being traveled down pretty quickly now. So we'll be excited to see in the next few years where we really land. You know, Stephanie, I guess it's a similar question. I'm really, you know, you from BD and in your world, you know, what excites you and where do you see things going in your particular product area?
So yeah, this is a great question. Some of the things when I think about the progression of technology improvement, right? You know, when I think 30 years ago and the surgical focus and how we've switched it to endovascular or minimally invasive procedures, almost everything that's been spoken about today is all minimally invasive. I'm seeing some incredible technologies in the non-invasive realm. And they're today really in maybe the interventional oncology space, but seeing the potential for some of those similar modalities to be able to be brought over into the peripheral vascular space as an example, or broader throughout, I think is going to be truly fascinating. I think it's actually closer than probably we think. And it's hard to imagine that we could move to a non-invasive space, but with some of the tech out there, I think it is possible. So that, to me, seeing that over the next 10 years transpire and move will be great. I also think informatics. So a lot of us have spoken about, okay, how can we take data, right? And utilize data, all this imaging, everything you just spoke about, Dr. Lester, and about you have all of this fusion technology. How can we take that data and really help inform our treatment algorithm decisions, right? Instead of today, you know, as a physician, I would assume interventionalists, as they're treating, they're going off of their vast wealth of knowledge and history and of example of seeing these patients. Okay, this has worked, that has worked, this hasn't worked. Being able then to actually get that data more readily accessible in our hands from an imaging upfront to say, this patient is going to be treated best with this, and here's what I've seen over time, right? And to have the data and the informatics to actually inform decisions, I think quickly, and how we integrate informatics. It goes back to sensors that Nadine was saying. How can we use sensors to inform us when things are working with wearables and they're going down, and why are they going down, and what could we have done differently to help drive that front end treatment progression as well. So I think a move towards more non-invasive and the utilization of informatics and incorporating that into our products to enable decision making is really where I see the future going.
You know, that's so true. You know, it's been said that the doubling time of medical knowledge, like in the 1950s, was many, many years, but in this age, it's every 73 days. And so that means that a human being needs to begin to ingest and structure and synthesize data, which is currently 3 times the size of Wikipedia every 73 days. Of course, that's not humanly possible. So how we sort of integrate that data into the human sort of collective conscience to sort of bring best sort of therapies to patients is going to be something we're going to see, because there's no doubt that this sort of informatics and access to data and analytics and the computational biology is really going to influence the types of devices that we see and the types of patients that we're going to engage these sorts of therapies with, because there's clearly things that the human sort of brain and the human eye cannot pick up that somehow these systems are able to tell us, right? And it's really sort of both scary and exciting. But I only just temper it by saying that we must ensure that human intuition stays at the helm of decision making, because and we must avoid that heuristic assumption that the machines are always right, because we can see the perils that can bring. I'm sure those pilots of the 737 Maxes, as they were barreling to the ground, realized, hey, wait a minute, these machines don't quite have this right, but they had no way to overcome that. So I think we have to temper some of that enthusiasm to ensure that the human still stays at the helm of decision making. We only have a couple more minutes, Russ, and I wanted to there's another question that had come in, and it's kind of an interesting question. In no way does this pass judgment on the current processes, but it's just simply to evoke thought. And I'm interested, or they're interested sort of in thoughts on whether the FDA is really still sort of fit for purpose in improving MedTech devices in this particular area. And I mean, I see some smiles in the Nadim there, but what your thoughts are on this? I know it's maybe too strong a question if you don't feel comfortable to answer, but just get a thought about where we're going in the MedTech space with sort of approvals.
Yeah, just want to make sure my mic was on. The question about the FDA, I think it's an important question, especially what's been going on, in the world with vaccines and everything else. But over the 12 years that I've been involved with the FDA and transcatheter heart valves, the FDA has kind of reinvented itself, and they've become an outstanding partner in bringing innovative cardiac implants and devices to the market. It's really looking out for patients by creating a clear path to get innovative devices to the patients. And we've also seen an excellent collaboration in the area of pediatric devices and a strong working relationship with all of our adult devices. They have a pre-submission process where we've been able to discuss with the FDA what is the pathway to getting a device into a clinical trial and getting it approved. And that has really streamlined the submission process, and things have just run smoothly and very timely. They're doing an excellent job of reviewing and assuring safety of the devices. I mentioned when I spoke earlier that our first clinical trial, we were only allowed to work with patients who had no other option. They're clearly looking out for the safety of patients. So in the area that I've been involved with, the FDA, they really are striving to get innovative therapies into the hands of physicians, knock down barriers for innovative devices, but at the same time assuring safety. So I would say the FDA is definitely fit for the purpose, and we really have a good working relationship with them. They don't hesitate to push back, but their guidance has been very helpful.
I would sort of echo that too. My experience with the FDA, particularly in our MedTech and our accelerator and the companies and the portfolio companies, the same way. They've been extremely actually helpful and easy to work with and engaging and providing very sort of positive and strong feedback to help sort of strengthen that product. So my experience too has only been really very positive in the MedTech arena. And as you said, they have sort of reinvented themselves in a way. And they are very open to this type of discussion and engagement, and in a way sort of shared decision making, to use a medical term, into how we're going to take these devices. So I appreciate those comments, and that's been my experience as well, that they've been extremely helpful and very positive in this space. But Nadim, you were nodding, and we only have a couple of minutes left, but I'd be interested in your thoughts, because you've had a ride through your device to the FDA, so I'd be interested in your story.
Yeah, and more than this, Dr. Lester, I was the chairman of AdvaMed, and before that, chairman of AdvaMed Excel, the MedTech basically lobbying group, or the industry trade association group. So we had to work with FDA very closely now for more than 10 years. Russ was right on the money in here. About 12 years ago, under the leadership of Dr. Jeff Shuren, FDA embarked in a change in their own culture. And they went from saying yay, nay to saying yay, nay. Have you considered this? Have you thought about this? Why don't you look at this? And so forth. So they moved from being a policeman at the end of the line to becoming more of a helper at the beginning of the line with companies. And we've seen so many initiatives, Case for Quality, the early feasibility trial in cardiovascular, among others. Listen, during the pandemic, I had a lot of appreciation here for all of the men and women at FDA. They had to do double their job in very difficult circumstances. And yet, when you look at the statistics of the timeline, from product submissions to product approval and so forth, they kept them as close as possible to the objectives while having to deal with a pandemic, while having to deal with so many emergency use authorizations and so forth. Now, for the future, I think FDA has some challenges where they need to keep reinventing themselves. All of the machine learnings where software changes its behavior as it learns more data. How do you regulate those? All of the big data, big information, the early warning signs that FDA would receive. How do you tackle this? Let's say you see an early warning sign, but the data is incomplete. Do you raise a panic or do you dig deeper? I think those areas, I think ultimately FDA would have to move away from this pre-approval, post-approval to more creation of a continuum of access of devices, from the early days where there is little evidence, just give access to those patients who really need it and physicians who are really educated about it, to more and more evidence available, more and more patients and more physicians have access to it. Fascinating subject.
Yeah, no, it really is. I think, you talk about sort of this concept of change. And I think for anything that we do in life, to improve, you must change. To be perfect, you must change often, as they say, right? So I think that's no different for any of us or anything that we do. And I'm glad you echo that, because again, I want to reiterate that I found that our experiences have been really quite positive in sort of sharing and helping to make these things better. With that, we just have a couple of minutes. Maybe we have an opportunity to see the results of our poll question before we sort of close out. If that can pop back up, maybe yes, maybe no. There we go. Well, that's going to be very helpful then. So it's basically split. Oh, well, there we go at the bottom. Yeah, I don't know what our thoughts are there, but it's interesting. I think that the fundamental management of chronic disease requires one thing, and that's to promote, support, and sustain positive changes in our behavior. And understanding and quantifying ourselves and understanding our own data can be very, very impactful in changing those sorts of behaviors. As simple as things as how many steps did you take today? How did you sleep last night? Those sorts of things. So maybe that is very true, that these sort of devices that sort of enhance this concept of the quantified self will be something that we'll be looking at in the near future. Well, we have about 2 minutes left. I don't know, Stephanie, if you had, or JP, any brief last comments you wanted to make about anything, your thoughts, the FDA question. Well, we have about a minute or so before we close out.
I actually think everyone summed it up perfectly. I think the pre-submission process, when I look 10, 15 years ago working with FDA versus today, it's night and day. And that ability to collaborate upfront and early is exceptionally helpful. So nothing more additional than whatever else, everything's been said. It's been a nice change over the last 10 years. So.
Oh, wonderful. Listen, this has been an exciting morning or afternoon for wherever you may be in the country or in the world. I am, again, want to say inspired to hear your stories and to learn about the types of products and services that you're really bringing to our patients in cardiovascular disease. As a clinical and practicing cardiologist, still active, it's really exciting, and use most, if not all, of these products in one way or another. So these have sort of reached the clinical sphere. So I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy day to share with us some of your thoughts. I do want to mention to the audience that the webcast is viewable on the Galien Foundation homepage. To remind ourselves that the Thursday will be the forum, the evening awards event and presentation of the 2021 Roy Vallejo's pro bono humanitarian award winner, which will be given jointly to the CEOs of the companies that led this year's unprecedented early arrival of vaccine and therapeutics to fight COVID-19. So encourage all of you, if not in person, that this will be on the web, and that there are, as we said, 18 different webinars, and they will be on the homepage for you to view at your own time. So with that, I want to thank you all once again for taking time out of your day, and I wish you all the very best and look forward to seeing some of you live or in person in New York in a couple of days.
Thanks, Dr.
Thanks, guys.
Lester.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Dr. Lester.
Bye, guys.
Congratulations, everyone.